Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the owner and founder of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and I've been waiting to do this video for a little while because I felt like there was so much to say, and I'm going to try to keep everything as brief as possible and just sort of as concise as possible. But I just, I thought this would be an important video, and I didn't want to not do it justice. So, double negative there. So, what I want to talk about today is the anxious attachment and fearful avoidant relationship dynamic. And I get a lot of inquiries about this, arguably even as much as I do about the dismissive avoidant and anxious attachment style dynamic. And I think this is because this can be a dynamic that people really, really struggle with, because things can be so good and so connected and so strong, and it can be like fireworks in the beginning, and then it's followed up with sometimes a lot of pain or confusion or misunderstandings, really depending on how long the relationship goes on for. So the time frame of this relationship seems to have a really strong impact on sort of how chaotic the relationship can become, or how smooth the relationship goes, or how much confusion there can be that sort of comes out of it. So number one, you want to know where these relationship sort of styles, these attachment styles come from. And if you've watched some of my earlier videos, you'll know I sort of tend to go through things in a lot of detail. So I'll just keep it concise for now. The emotional wounds and the core wounds for the anxious attachment style individual is usually that they felt some really strong form of inconsistency in their relationships that program their nervous system and subconscious mind to deeply fear abandonment or rejection, okay? And they usually have core wounds out of that around feeling not good enough, unworthy of love, unloved, or even things like alone, abandoned. Those will sort of be the anxious attachment style's core wounds. So of course, when any of these core wounds get activated or triggered at a subconscious level, their nervous system comes alive with these feelings. So they'll get like all that stress in their chest and all that nervousness and anxiety, or they can be sort of overcome by their emotions. And then, as a means to try to cope with that strong level of emotional intensity, they can become more clingy, more needy, sometimes have unhealthy coping mechanisms for trying to gain validation, like making their partner jealous, threatening to leave, to seeing if the person will ask them to stay, all these sorts of things. And really, these are all just tools born out of desperately trying to sort of quell their anxiety and trying to sort of prevent themselves from reliving all these fears and painful experiences that they lived in childhood at some point, and really, really young into their sort of infancy as well. So these are the anxious attachment styles core wounds. The fearful avoidance core wounds, and the reason I'm explaining these is because you can see sort of the path of interaction here. It keeps things really clear. The fearful avoidant often at a very core level just felt like they couldn't trust their caregivers, couldn't rely on them, couldn't depend on them to meet their physical needs and emotional needs, or sometimes one or the other. But there was a lot of instability, and there was a lot of like confusion and usually a lot of trauma for this attachment style in the way of like chaos. So I think, trauma can definitely be really strong on the inconsistency front. That's a strong form of trauma in and of itself, and especially on the emotional neglect front, right, with the strong dismissive avoidance styles. But when I say trauma in the context of fearful avoidance, I mean like chaos trauma, like abuse in the household, maybe a mentally ill caregiver, somebody who was, addicted to drugs, maybe just a ton of like instability, chaos, fighting, sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental, emotional abuse, just, tears, sort of being exposed to too much. And even just like enmeshment trauma, maybe having a sort of codependent parent who expects so much from you, or a narcissistic parent. Any of that kind of stuff can constitute for the fearful avoidance. So the fearful avoidant, more than any other relationship style of attachment, is usually like layered with so many different triggers in their subconscious mind. It's like they go into relationships and they tend to have like wounds and fears that are from both sides of the anxious and dismissive avoidance attachment styles. So they will have like the fear of abandonment, feeling alone sometimes, not knowing how to self-soothe at times, or really struggling with it. more so than dismissive or secure. Feeling betrayed is a huge thing. Feeling like things are inconsistent, feeling rejected, feeling not good enough, and then also feeling trapped, helpless, powerless are such key, like huge core wounds for the fearful avoidant, loaded with guilt and shame. And all of these things are like this minefield that are just waiting to sort of be triggered and stepped on. And at the same time, a fearful avoidant attachment style person is usually like really charming, really aware of other people, really kind. They've had to make all these adaptations all the way from early childhood to sort of survive and figure things out. And so they can just be like super charismatic and charming and loving, and people will like really see and feel and sense that good side of them and how great they are with people. And so they can be really hot and cold there. And then they can also be really chaotic themselves, because if you are a person walking around with a minefield of triggers and your partner is walking through it all the time, eventually they're going to go off. So this is a really interesting dynamic in the sense that like both parties will care so deeply about each other's needs, can be like hugely present with each other and connect at such deep levels so quickly. And this can then sort of start bridging the gap, or not bridging the gap, sort of like creating a path or trajectory for a lot of intense emotion and a lot of other, challenges sort of later on. So keep in mind, usually the more a fearful avoidant feels for a person, also the more their attachment style is activated in a way, because it's like all these feelings, it's as if it's like, somebody's walking through my minefield now, and, they've got huge feet, or they're, the more the feelings are there, it's like the more likely they are to trigger us, because the more sort of power they have over the fearful avoidant from their internal world's perspective. So it's like they're that much scarier because they could trigger all my wounds, and I can feel that I have them here. And so for the anxious attachment style, usually at the beginning, there will be all these fireworks, all this stuff, but the fearful avoidant will usually be the one that starts to kind of pull away. Now, in the beginning, in the earlier stages of the relationship, this may not be as chaotic because both tend to be a little bit self-sacrificial, and the anxious attachment can be sort of more clingy. So the fearful avoidant will feel kind of validated and almost a little bit safer initially with the anxious attachment style, because it's like they're not going anywhere. They're present. They need me. They look at my needs. They see and hear me. They're like everything I wanted. And so even though they get this, gut reaction or instinct to sort of pull back and keep themselves safe, usually it starts off in sort of a healthier way at the beginning. Now, the clinging itself also will trigger, though, to some degree, the fearful avoidance wounds around feeling trapped, helpless, powerless, like suffocated, any of that kind of stuff, expectations, commitment. So they'll have a little bit of that. But usually the fearful avoidant is a little bit less volatile with an anxious attachment style than with a dismissive avoidant, though this is not always the case. Okay, this is just sort of a pattern I tend to see. Now, if the anxious attachment style uses unhealthy coping mechanisms, like tries to make their partner jealous, tries to, pull back and see if it gives, gets them some reinforcement or validation, threatens to leave or end the relationship, or use these sort of strategies to get at the fearful avoidant to look for that validation. Let's say when the fearful avoidant starts to pull back a little bit, now we can get some pretty unhealthy stuff that can come up. Because if the fearful avoidant feels so strongly, and then they feel, after they've been so vulnerable that their partner is trying to make them jealous, or, is doing something behind their back or anything like that, I would argue that some of the deepest core wounds, probably the deepest core wounds on a general level for the fearful avoidant, is like feeling betrayed, rejected, like they can't trust. Because it triggers sort of like the deepest part of the chaos that they experienced in those forms of trauma. And so this will be something that the fearful avoidant either becomes kind of volatile in response to, or will shut down really hard, really quickly, again, depending on how much sort of connection has been built. So if this is 3 months into the relationship, they might be more likely to shut down. If this is a year into the relationship, they might be more likely to, become volatile because they don't think that they're going to leave. It's hard for them to leave. And so they feel it's like both sides of the attachment spectrum get challenged there. It's like, I need to get out of here because I'm being caused all this pain. And, like deepest triggers are coming to the surface, like these big bombs internally are going off. And at the same time, I feel trapped, helpless, and powerless because I love this person. My emotions are so connected here. I can't leave. And So it's like this inner turmoil. It really triggers sort of that ambivalence you'll see, that flip-flopping with the fearful avoidance so much. So we can sort of see like the lack of health, sort of unhealthy stuff that will come up in a relationship will usually come up a little bit later on. Oftentimes I will see the fearful, avoidant, anxious attachment style dynamic sort of fade out before it becomes too serious. Like it'll be fireworks, it's amazing, things are going so well, and then there can be some push and pull and some interesting stuff and some confusion, and it may not always sort of stay on the right track. So here are some rules, because I could go into like all the dynamics so much more. But keep in mind too, like when the fearful avoidant pulls back, that's when the anxious attachment style feels like, oh my gosh, like I'm not good enough, I'm unloved, I'm being abandoned. It's just so painful. Like they experience so much pain again. And they can sort of create different approaches to how they express that pain and what they do with that pain. It doesn't have to be through unhealthy coping mechanisms. So here are some rules if this is you in your relationship and you're of either one of these attachment styles, or if this is just somebody you care about and you want to sort of share this. Number one, do not seek validation in unhealthy ways. The fearful avoidant can do that too sometimes. Do not do it. Make it a rule. If you are needing validation from your partner, ask for it. Don't go to your partner and be like, oh, I had somebody hitting on me this morning and da 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 da, or oh, my coworker really likes me, who you spend a lot of time with, or like whatever it is. Don't do it that way. Okay. For either attachment style, it's extremely painful. It creates tons of insecurity in the relationship. And what I find, and in no way am I insinuating that either style is, cheating or anything like that, so your partner's cheating. But what I do find is a general pattern is one of the core reasons people cheat is because they feel insecure in their relationship, and they're trying to kill the sting of that insecurity and that instability by seeking some kind of stability outside of the relationship or validation outside of the relationship. So if you feel invalidated, don't even like create the context or the circumstances that could lead to unfaithfulness or a disconnect in the relationship that way. Tell your partner you feel insecure. It is so hard to do. It's scary at first. It's not a comfortable thing, because again, when we were children and we expressed our insecurities or our fears or our feelings and needs, they were often rejected by our caregivers because we were being socialized, and it's the parents' way. And so, it's sort of like we are exposing ourselves to potentially reliving all this stored trauma from childhood. And not that it's so traumatic, like a 9 out of 10, but trauma is also stored through low-level charges, like a 3 or a 4 or a 5, that happens so repeatedly. And arguably, that's actually even more painful sometimes. So it can be really scary to be that vulnerable, but it is, I would say, like one of the most fundamental and important pieces to making this relationship work. So learn how to be vulnerable, right? Like I'll do a whole video about this actually, because it's such an important topic. But say you're feeling, hey, I'm feeling insecure and I need validation. And be clear as you can be. So validation for me looks like, a hug when I come home, or being present when we're on our date, like put your phone away, or validation looks like words of affirmation, positive reinforcement, encouragement, support, whatever it is for you. Express it. When you're not feeling it, express it. And try to understand why. Is there something? Don't try to be inquisitive. Don't get like blamey. Oh, you don't validate me enough. Don't do that. Because again, same thing. That triggers like when we were criticized in childhood or blamed for something, usually we got punished after. So right away, like the whole nervous system stops listening to you, of the other person. The other person's nervous system stops listening to you and prepares to be, hurt or punished or shamed or something that will lead to like a shutdown, and then your partner's not present with you. They're actively trying to defend themselves for whatever's going on. So express from a vulnerable space and ask why. What's going on? I feel like there's a disconnect, or is there something that I did to hurt you, and can we make it better? Be as vulnerable and as clear as possible, and try to keep the conversation open and stay receptive. Even keep your body language open, like or hold the person's hand, or do something where you're showing like that calm and the intention to work towards a common goal together. Now, if you're on the recipient end of hearing this, or if you are expressing and then asking for your partner to share with you, another super, super, super important thing here is we have to learn how to validate each other's feelings. When we validate feelings, we don't make the person's like behavior correct. We're not validating if they hurt us. Like if somebody sends a mean text message and we say, and they say, well, it's because I was hurt. We're not going, yay, send more mean text messages. Everything's fine. If you're hurt, you can send mean text messages all the time. No way. We're saying, hey, I see that you're hurt, but it doesn't make that behavior okay. Can you try not to send those mean text messages? I'm so sorry you're hurt. I see your pain, but that hurt me right back. So we want to validate the person's feelings when they express them, or we want to ask what their feelings are, and we want to validate their feelings without encouraging the behaviors, if that makes sense. And so much of the time when people are arguing, especially this dynamic, like the anxious and fearful avoidant, they are just trying to feel seen, heard, understood, because both of them usually really care about connection and have a high value on like deep connection and more of the connection. And so, they really just want their feelings to be heard and understood. They're not so interested in arguing about right or wrong and what behaviors are correct and who's right at the end of the day. It's not like an ego trap. This is like, hey, I want you to know how I feel and I want to know how you feel so we can understand each other and stay connected. So validating feelings goes such a long way. And again, like go to the emotions list, circle your emotions. I felt hurt. I felt afraid. I felt insecure. I felt uncomfortable. I felt alone. I felt confused. I felt lost. Like express the feelings themselves, because your partner's not, you mitigate the chances so strongly that your partner is going to turn around and argue with you when you're expressing from a space of vulnerability. Like you have a really high chance of being heard and of reconnecting and of things being safe, okay? Learn to self-soothe separately. This is so key because this is a great attachment style dynamic to end up in a relationship where there's a lot of codependency. So you really want to have time carved out, and it doesn't have to be like around things that are triggering. It doesn't mean like, on Friday nights, if both of you have been cheated on in the past, for example, that you have to go out and like get drunk at bars separately every Friday and Saturday so that you're not together and then you're like, but don't do stuff that like triggers each other. Have healthy habits in the relationship that you agree to ahead of time that actually create a space for you to do things separately. So this might be that you go to the gym separately. This might be that, one person goes and spends time with a friend on a Sunday afternoon and the other person works towards a goal or a long-term dream that they have. Spend time separately. Have a habit once a week where you create that pocket of time to be spent separately. Because the more codependent you become, the more self-sacrificing you come, which are the breeding grounds for resentment, the less good you are, the worse you are at setting boundaries. Okay. And again, that becomes another breeding ground for resentment and confusion and loss of identity and clinging and neediness and then somebody pushing away or feeling trapped. Like it's not a good look for this relationship. So you want to make sure that you have your separation in your life to some degree, because you don't want to feel resentful, self-sacrificing, poor with your boundaries, a loss of your sense of self to the relationship, because this just creates like a really unhealthy foundation for what you want a relationship to look like. Another thing, learn how to settle into a relationship. I should do a whole video about that too, but I see that these attachment styles tend to like expect that a relationship will forever be in the honeymoon phase because the fireworks were there and things were so good. And we have to learn that there's stages of a relationship. We go through the fireworks and then we sort of settle in and we connect and we get over the honeymoon phase. And we respect and we love with warmth and consistency and support. And, we don't have to be at this high point all the time. We want to really get into the space of understanding what healthy love looks like and how to be in that space of healthy love and exchange. I find that these two attachment styles specifically, especially when together, tend to struggle with like accepting when the honeymoon phase is over, and usually they feel like they have to create chaos. Like this is really subconscious, but at a subconscious level, they'll almost want to create problems or chaos to get that spike of feelings back, to reinforce that like, look, the honeymoon phase is still here. Look at how much we feel. And again, volatility is one of the deal breakers for a relationship long term. So, it's much healthier and safer and much more likely that your relationship lasts and heals and is in a good space when you're settling into the relationship and getting beyond the honeymoon phase, more so than that you're trying to hang on to the honeymoon phase, and it creates this volatility, and you're trying to sort of subconsciously create fights to ignite the emotions and see that you still care and validate each other that way and have the makeup sex the next day or whatever the situation is. So learn how to settle in. And if you want me to do a video about that, like the stages of a relationship and how to settle into a relationship, please comment that on here and I will totally do that. Because I see that that's a struggle for a lot of people as well. And it's so interesting. And I think it's just something that's not addressed very effectively or talked about even. So another thing, discuss your triggers. This is so, I like get couples to do this and I do this myself with my partner and it's so friggin' helpful. So sit down, like if you're sitting here and you're watching this video or you're watching this with your partner, even better, like sit down and write on paper what your triggers are, okay? I get triggered when I feel trapped. I get triggered when I feel helpless. And set the intention at the beginning of this conversation to not get angry at each other's triggers. Remember specifically, your triggers are not personal. They are 0% personal. Your triggers are triggers because they come from a boatload of past repetitive experiences that have ingrained an emotional pattern in your subconscious mind that when it's activated is so strong that it overflows. So your triggers are not with your partner now. Your partner might trigger you now because they touch these things, because honestly, people close to us touch our triggers. That's kind of how it works. That's a different topic of conversation for why, but the triggers are the result of your past experiences that you're now reprojecting onto your present relationship or present moments. So triggers are not personal. Sit down and map out what your triggers are. Usually the fearful avoidant feels trapped, helpless, powerless. They can also have the trigger of not feeling enough or unworthy of love. Then they also have the triggers of betrayed, rejected, a lack of trust is a huge thing. And the anxious attachment style usually feels like emotionally abandoned or physically abandoned in terms of space and time, alone, lonely, unloved, unworthy, a lot like lower self-esteem. When they feel pushed away, they take it so strongly as rejection. So we want to be really clear here, like what are each other's triggers and when do we experience these things? And then, and this is the key part of this exercise, put strategies. What do you need from me when this happens to you? What do you need from me when, I do forget to answer that text and your nervous system does light up and gets all nervous and anxious and thinks that I'm leaving. What can we do there that's healthy? Let's consciously set intentions ahead of time for what we need and what we can do better when it comes to each other's triggers. And let's develop a clear understanding here. This exercise is it's gold if you do it properly. And sometimes you might need a facilitator, honestly, if you're really new to this stuff or if you're not fully completely equipped, but you can do it on your own. You can do it from this video. And maybe I'll sort of go through something like this too in a future video, just in terms of how to really have this conversation in deeper step by step, but I can't make this too long right now. So this is super important. Keep in mind too, both of these attachment styles do have a need to feel seen, heard, understood. Super important. Something that works for these two attachment styles together is that they've got a lot of overlap with their wounds and needs. So it can, again, that's part of what creates the fireworks. But then again, because there can be this you can be triggered by the same things, what that can also result in is that both people sort of go to war and there's more of a power struggle because it's well, I don't feel heard and you don't feel heard. So what are we going to do about it? And you can get all frustrated. Just one of you has to choose to go first. What do you want the outcome to be? To have peace in your relationship, to have harmony, to have connection, establish, you can just say let's just both hear each other for a minute. And just validate it. Let's even agree before we go into this fight or conversation that we're just going to hear each other out first. And we're both going to just validate each other's feelings and recognize how each other felt in the situation, irrespective of the behaviors. And then from that space, we can choose how we want to respond and what things we need to have met next or what discussions we need to have next here to resolve a potential conflict or something that happened. But let's hear each other first is super important. And that'll create that reconnection, that validation. And then both of these people, because they're really kind to each other and really good about each other's needs, when they feel connected and seen and heard and understood, they're usually much more effective at dealing with everything that comes out of that after, moving through and resolving arguments. Another thing, people think we have this like belief that if we resent something or we're not over something, we can just kind of repress our feelings and time heals all wounds and we'll get over it. That doesn't really work at all. Because the subconscious mind stores everything. It colors all of its memories with emotion. So that emotion is still there waiting to be reactivated at a different time if something similar happens. And then we just have built a trigger in regards to this person in our relationship. And we get angry or frustrated at that person all over again. We have, more chaos that comes out of this. So emotions will always come out in different ways if they are not resolved. And that's a key principle. It may not be the next day, it may be a month later. It could be a friggin' year later of not talking about one thing, but it will come out. And it can come out as a direct comment about the thing that you're upset about, or as an indirect and passive aggressive comment. So either way, like, we really want to make an effort, especially between these two attachment styles, to connect and to talk with each other, to resolve things. A rule that my partner and I have and have had for a long time that's been super effective is, like, we keep our resentment tank empty. Like, we talk about everything. And in the beginning stages of the relationship, it was harder, right? Because you have to have like a lot of sort of longer discussions and there's a commitment involved in that. But as time goes on over the years, you really like learn and understand each other's points and perspectives and core wounds. And then you just know, like, hey, I might be about to do something, but wait, I know that would hurt my partner if I do it that way. So let me just adapt really quickly. And both parties can do that for one another. And it creates a lot of respect. And even like the ability to have chaos or conflict just drops way off. And it's a super healthy and effective thing. So make that commitment to talk about things as well. Don't leave things unresolved. It's not good for these two attachment dynamics together. The last thing I want to just mention is that again, volatility can break a relationship. It doesn't matter how many feelings are there, how many fireworks are there, how strong the connection is. Enough volatility over time can really, really hurt people. So, and can really like shut things down. So, when we have all this high emotion and both of these attachment styles have, can be very sensitive and very emotional and emotionally invested and really give their all. And, we can get lost in our emotions sometimes, and we can forget to take a step out of them and take a moment and sort of calm ourselves down and express in a way that isn't hurtful or that's very clear and articulate. And this is one of the key things that you really want to work on, especially if you've been in this dynamic of attachment for a little while. You want to be really clear about how you're expressing yourself. You really want to take the volatility out of it. Both of you want to monitor, like, raising your voice and your tone, because we don't want to trigger each other to be defensive. So just keep that in mind. I remember actually being still working on this myself, and we all will always have work to do, but I've come a very, very long way from how I used to be in relationships. And so, I remember reading one time that volatility is one of the top 3 relationship killers in a relationship, and thinking, wow, like I thought that my frustration or my anger was justified. And there is no justification. There just really is no justification for hurting somebody you love. And that can be through tone of voice, through, the way you use your words, the way you raise your voice, whatever it is. Like, that's not at a conscious level what we ever want. And so keep that in mind. For me, that was just a really big shifter. It was like, wait, sometimes I think that person hurt me so much that it's okay to be so angry, but it's not. And so the more we can remember that and bring that conscious intention to be really respectful and grounded in all of our conversations, the more we get seen, the more we get heard, the more we get understood, the easier it is for our needs to be met, and vice versa, the more we stay connected. And then we start seeing, like, wow, this is a way better way to be in a relationship, to live in a relationship, to commit to a relationship. Or it's so much easier, where our needs are actually met this way, not through the the strong emotional expression of things, even though it's so beautiful how, sensitive these attachment styles can be and how in tune they can be. We want to sort of use the benefits of that and mitigate the drawbacks. And that's sort of one of the big challenges here that you want to commit to. So this is a bit of a long video. Thank you so much for watching. If you're getting a lot of this channel, please like it, share it, subscribe. And in the next little while, we will be putting up a ton of courses online. So the Personal Development School has always offered courses in person, and we're doing some online stuff for the future. And if you are interested or want to get in touch, it's still going to be a couple months away, but please leave a comment, because I would love to sort of just get an idea of what you'd like to see for the courses, anything else I can further develop, more information you're looking for. The more comments and the more just awareness, the better I can sort of be of service this way. And yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Thanks for connecting. Have a great day.